Hi everybody, welcome to today's video. We are looking at 5 easy film music cliches. So what is a cliche? I've included the most overused chord change in modern composition as an example there for you. My argument is that if you know what the cliches are, you can exploit them, so your audience has reference points, and then you can also be the people that then go on and develop these and come up with the next batch of cliches for everybody to enjoy. What are we going to be looking at? Leitmotif, pedal notes, the Hans Zimmer string glimmer, ominous brass, and big percussion. Leitmotif, that's the definition. Bonus points if you can recognize the leitmotif in the score underneath. Now I've just written a suite of music for my Sherlock Tones videos, 4 different pieces. There is 2 leitmotifs I've used throughout, and I'm going to show you how those go. The first thing we need to say about leitmotif is that you have this little logo, a musical logo, and then you can alter the musical elements, how loud, the duration, the articulation, the instrumentation, the register you use it, and all of these different things will alter what our audience feel the character is doing. Now here is my one and only tip for writing a leitmotif as a beginner. Take the rhythm of the name of the character you are using and see if you can write a little melody that goes with that character. My character is called Sherlock Tones, 3 short syllables, and here is the leitmotif that I came up to go with him. So there is my 2nd of a minor key, the 3rd of the minor key, and the root note. It's in octaves. Here it's a little bit developed. Here it goes up in a register, and then we just have a little answering phrase. First time it gets used, the theme goes in the trumpets. You'll notice I've done what I always do, which I've started with a piano sketch, is what I showed earlier on, and then I've gone on and orchestrated it afterwards. So you can hear Sherlock Tones being played predominantly by the trumpets. In this example, you will hear the leitmotif of Sherlock Tones hidden in a piccolo. That's the little baby flute, here right at the top. And at the end there, you'll hear that it's just altered ever so slightly to give a sense that we are moving forwards. And this is the very last few bars of the final piece which I wrote for Sherlock Tones. So I wanted to have that leitmotif stated in massive fashion. So here everybody does it in unison. There's also a leitmotif for Sherlock Tones' nemesis, Dr. Sharply Flat. So again, I thought about the shape of that phrase. I wanted it to be really strident. I also wanted it to be really evil, so I hid the most evil interval in music, a tritone, in there as well. And the first time you hear that is in Sherlock Tones 1, and everything blazes away. Dr. Sharply Flat. Complete with cheesy voiceover. One thing you're going to need to know is the formula for your leitmotif. So the rhythms that it uses and the intervals that it uses, so that you can transpose these to different places if you need to. Okay, so I've put the formula for Dr. Sharply Flat up on the screen. In Sherlock Tones 2, you can hear that phrase come in at a much slower tempo, much lower down in the cellos. Then do an answering phrase to it. And my final example of the Dr. Sharply Flat motif being used is in the conclusion, Sherlock Tones 5. I hide it right at the bottom of everything. It's in the trumpets and the brass section. First off, it's got a preceding phrase before it's quoted. Here. What I did next was made sure that that fitted over the underlying chords, and I put it in all the brass in octaves to give it really big weight. That's great fun because you wouldn't even know it was there when everybody else is playing at the same time. So I'll give you a bar ahead so you can hear the brass coming in. So he hid it right underneath everything else going on, which is one of the great fun things to do in composition. It only works if you know what your leitmotifs, rhythms and intervals are. Yes, you can play with them and change them, but you need to know what the basic formula is to start with. So the next technique is the easiest. They're called pedal notes. In the most simple form, it's a long held low note like this. And that goes on for ages. The important thing is that you have a chord progression going on over the top that changes. One place I used the pedal technique was at the beginning of Sherlock Tones 2. I also did it in a fifth here because it's a really thick sound, so you can hear the long low notes in the double basses. And then we added some timpani over the top, and they're just alternating between the two different notes being used in the drone, so they are related immediately. And then just added the Dr. Sharply flat leitmotif over the top. And we get that ominous sense of tension going straight away. So a pedal doesn't have to be all the way at the bottom of the keyboard or your register at all. You can use it in any part of the register. Most often you will hear it right at the top of things. And here I've got tremolando violins because I've got a string library from the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Tremolando means they're doing the shaky thing with the bows, gives it a really ominous sound. I also do another variation on a pedal at the same time, which is where we can play a rhythm. This is the simplest rhythm possible. It's a pizzicato note in the violas on beat 1 each time. Sounds like this. And then the joy of composing is combining techniques. So if we listen to both at the same time. We've already got an atmosphere there, which works really well. And then to increase the tension, what we do here is create a bit of a funky rhythm going in the violas with the pedal notes octave down below, and that rhythm gets more complicated as we try and reach a climax. And the top violins, the violins 1, they go into octaves. Nobody is doing anything massively complicated just yet. So the big one, the Hans Zimmer string glimmer. I call it that because you hear it in a lot of his movies, but it's used by lots of composers. It's a really simple formula. You take the notes of the chord and you play semiquaver rhythms and you double each note. It couldn't be simpler. Before you go any further, you've got to know what your chord change is. There are some great suggestions in the movie which I'm putting up on the screen for you now. This guy really knows what he's on about. And to prove that I practice what I preach, here is the chord change I had for Sherlock Tones 5 as well. So the first part of doing a string glimmer is to know what your chord change is. I'm going from C major to D major. In the video that I suggested, that is a capital M to capital M. Now, depending on how fast your tempo is, do quavers or semiquavers. I've got a slower tempo, so I'm going to do semiquavers. And to start with, I'm just putting the root in. So this is going to be 16 semiquavers per bar. What we need to do is create a little bit of rhythmic interest, and we do that using the velocity control, and we do that using some rhythmic patterns. So I've turned up, in terms of velocity, how hard the note is hit, certain groupings. So I've got a group of 4, so a loud one in the first group, and then the rest of them are quieter, loud, 3 quiet, and then I've done the Coldplay rhythm 3 3 2, and each one of the beginnings of those groups is loud. For the sake of consistency, I just cut and paste that same pattern across, still just hammering away on the root notes. What we do now is make sure we do pairs of notes. This is the characteristic feature. And I'm going to do the root, which is in this case is a C, and the fifth. The nice thing about fifths is because they don't contain the third, the chord is still ambiguous and it allows for great melodies, etc., etc. to go on elsewhere in the arrangement. So here it is, same thing, same rhythms, but with a pair of roots, pair of fifths, pair of roots, pair of fifths. If you want to be a bit more adventurous, you can start altering the pattern a little bit. So here I went root fifth. When we changed chord to the D major chord, I thought, why not go fifth root? Last couple of stages, if you want to be a bit more adventurous, you can start using some other notes. Why not use the third, for example? So here I've put the third in on the end group of each 8. So we've got the same pattern for 7 notes, and then I've just replaced this fifth from there down to the third of the chord. If you wanted to be a little bit more adventurous still, the last thing you might want to try is adding a note from outside of the triad, probably from the scale or key that you're working in. This bit here is all over C major, so what I've done is done a very simple enclosure of the third. An enclosure just means to use a note that's in the scale of the chord that you're working over, and just play one note above or below it. So this F natural is one note above E in C major, and then I've repeated the trick in G major. I've enclosed the third by using G, which is one note higher in the key of D major than F sharp. So 6 steps: root notes, velocities for accents, pairs of notes in roots and fifths. You might want to change the pattern a little bit. Then you might want to think about using thirds or other notes. Sevenths work great, for example. And then if you want to try doing an enclosure, which is surrounding a note in that pattern with a note that's from its key, you can as well. Here's a good example of combining techniques. This time it's the pedal and the leitmotif. So how did we get to that? Here's the leitmotif. It's based on the second, the minor third, and the root. Then we doubled each of those notes like the Hans Zimmer string glimmer. We then preceded it with the root note, and again we doubled it to get that Hans Zimmer effect. and then those pedal notes, I drop them an octave. Finally, all we did was put that in the cellos and the double basses as well. So we got that in 3 different octaves. I needed to alter it a little bit to fit under the chord underneath, which is an F. And then we go to the flattened second for that evil sound. Fill. Fill. And then a lot of mucking about basically on the leitmotif. Done. In Sherlock Tones 5, I did the Hans Zimmer string glimmer in violins 1. Again, I've got it set to spiccato because it gives you that nice edgy sonority. And I am working in 12/8, so I've got a group of 3 quavers split into 6 semiquavers. And I am doubling notes. I start on the 5th of this C minor chord and then go to the root. Here is the 3rd of C minor, and there's the enclosure, which actually happens after the 3rd. That is then repeated 4 times. I couldn't make the 5th of this one work, so I just reduced the pattern to roots and 3rds. Here we're on a G minor chord, so I've got a double of the G, which is the root. I've got a double of the 5th, which is a D, and then I've got the enclosure here, and then that pattern is repeated throughout the bar, and then it goes into the next bar as well. By itself, sounds like this. Okay, now that's got some velocity changes in it, and I've tried to work on the dynamics a little bit. I could do more on that, to be honest with you, to make it sound even more effective, a professional would, and when we combine that with other techniques going on underneath, it sounds really, really effective. So the second violins just help accent the first note of each beat, and then the cellos are doing, it's not quite a pedal, they're doing the tremolando thing, and that's doubled in the strings an octave down. Fourth technique on the list is ominous brass. So that's going to mean French horns, trombones, tubas, bass trombones if you've got them. And one of the easy ways to make them sound ominous is to make sure they're playing really low in their register. If you split them into octaves, it sounds really effective. So I've got an example here. It's hidden in Sherlock Tones 3 just before the heavy section. Sounds like this. The last bar, what we do is we do a 10th. If you go and watch my video on spread chords, you'll know how to do that. I was really pleased with how this turned out in Sherlock Tones 5. We've got the trombones, and I've got a bass trombone from my sample library going as well. They do every other bar to start with. They're just on the root notes of the chord, and then to increase the momentum, after the phrase is repeated once, they start playing every bar. Sounds really ominous like this. So here now they're playing every bar. And that type of chord there is that 10th chord. Watch the spread chord video to get the hang of those. The cheeky thing which I did was put French horns over the top, and they're playing a really slow version of the Sherlock Tones leitmotif. So they are going 2nd minor 3rd root over the top. could have gone for every cliche in the book there, because that little beep, bam, bam is a fifth, which is a hunting interval, and it's associated with heroes in movies. For the last film music cliche, we're going to talk about orchestral percussion. You can spend a lot of time and a lot of money on orchestral percussion samples for movies. Percussion is really, really important. First off, we're going to cover effects. If you go to Logic and you go to the Orchestral kit, which you'll find in the percussion folder, you've got all sorts of great sounds. I thoroughly recommend you put on some bass drums, because it's really ominous sounding and it gives you loads and loads of atmosphere. So I'll play you the build-up section to the big drop in this piece. So that's going on underneath, adds loads and loads of atmosphere. Now you can spend a lot of time and trouble programming funky ostinato patterns, particularly for higher tempo kind of scenes. That's a great idea. Instead of programming loads of complicated ostinato myself, all I did was use an Apple drummer. You can use a bog standard drum beat. I used Logan from the Apple drummer selection, and I did the first pattern, which came up more or less, just moved this round a little bit. And that ends up sounding like this. Slow tempos are always good if you want to sound heavy. And then I did a little old Led Zeppelin trick. I doubled that across to another channel which is exactly the same, but I really EQ'd absolutely loads of bottom end off it. And then I added a tape delay and distortion and crushed it with a compressor as well, and it sounds like this by itself. and a delay, of course. It sounds a bit stupid, but when you put the two drum patterns together, it sounds massive. So the delay on that, the echo, is giving you a bit of movement. It's almost like having an extra percussionist. And when you put the guitars and stuff with that as well, we've got a nice heavy section going on. So we have leitmotif. Do something easy, but know exactly what your formula is. We have pedals, long notes, or the same note broken up into funky little rhythms. We have the Hans Zimmer string glimmer. We have the ominous brass, and we have use of percussion. If you combine those 5 things, you're going to end up with really simple film music which sounds very effective. I hope you've enjoyed the music. Go and check out the other tracks on the actual Sherlock Holmes videos. There's 1 to 5 to enjoy. If you like what you're hearing, like and subscribe to all the other YouTubery things. Practice your craft and the art will come. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.